The future of international politics transformations, theoretical gaps, and emerging challenges. 1. Potential transformations in the international order. The decline of unipolarity and the rise of multipolarity. The post-Cold War period was characterized by unipolarity, with the United States as the undisputed hegemon. However, this dominance has gradually eroded due to the relative decline of U.S. global influence and the simultaneous rise of other powers such as China, India, and the reassertion of Russia. The international order is transitioning toward multipolarity, where power is dispersed among several states and regions. China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), its military modernization, and assertive diplomacy indicate a long-term strategy to reshape global governance structures. Simultaneously, regional powers like Brazil, South Africa, and Turkey are pushing for greater influence in international institutions. This diffusion of power could result in a more fragmented but potentially more balanced global order, though one marked by competition rather than cooperation. B. The evolution of international institutions. Multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, World Trade Organization, WTO, and World Bank face increasing scrutiny and diminished effectiveness. The failure of institutions to adequately address pressing global crises ranging from climate change to pandemics and geopolitical conflicts has raised doubts about the liberal international order's resilience. Efforts to reform these institutions may define the next era of global politics. There is a growing push to make them more inclusive of the global south, enhance transparency, and increase operational effectiveness. Whether these reforms succeed will heavily shape the future architecture of international cooperation. C. Digital geopolitics and cyber governance. The digital transformation of global society is birthing a new theater of international politics. States now compete over technological dominance, control over data flows, and standard setting in areas such as AI, quantum computing, and cybersecurity. Nations like China and the U.S. are racing to define rules around digital sovereignty, internet governance, and cyber norms. In the absence of a global regulatory regime, digital geopolitics will likely foster a fragmented internet splinter nets with competing norms, infrastructures, and platforms. The politicization of tech supply chains, as seen in the U.S. restrictions on Huawei and the semiconductor export bans, will further deepen digital rivalries. D. Environmental geopolitics and climate diplomacy. Climate change is redefining international politics. Rising sea levels, desertification, and resource scarcity are likely to drive geopolitical tensions, mass migrations, and conflict over access to water, food, and habitable land. This has birthed the field of environmental geopolitics, where states must incorporate climate resilience and sustainability into their national security agendas. The Paris Agreement and COP summits reflect growing climate diplomacy, but disparities in responsibility and vulnerability between global north and south continue to hinder effective climate action. The future may see an increase in eco-strategic alliances and even green protectionism, as countries seek to secure sustainable advantages. 2. The gap between international political theories and reality. A. Theoretical idealism versus political realism. International relations (IR) theory often struggles to keep pace with the complexity of global developments. While liberal institutionalism emphasizes cooperation, democracy, and rules-based order, many real-world interactions reflect realist dynamics, power competition, national interests, and security dilemmas. For example, liberal expectations that economic interdependence would reduce the likelihood of war were challenged by the Russia-Ukraine conflict and U.S.-China tensions. Similarly, constructivist theories emphasizing norms and identity sometimes fail to predict sudden strategic shifts rooted in nationalist or populist rhetoric. This highlights the persistent gap between theoretical abstraction and political practice. Future IR scholarship must increasingly account for hybrid threats, informal power structures, and non-state actors such as multinational corporations, terrorist networks, and climate migrants. B. Western-centric paradigms, and the rise of Global South perspectives. Most mainstream IR theories were developed in the West and reflect Euro-American historical experiences. However, these frameworks often fail to capture the priorities and strategies of the Global South. Issues such as post-colonial justice, non-alignment, and development security remain under-theorized. The emergence of non-Western IR schools like Chinese Tianxia, all under heaven or Indian strategic culture, approaches marks an epistemological shift. Theoretical pluralism is necessary to reflect the increasingly decentralized and diverse landscape of international politics. C. The limits of rational actor models. Traditional theories often assume that states act as rational, unitary actors, maximizing their national interests. However, contemporary politics reveals a more complex reality shaped by irrationality, identity politics, disinformation, and domestic fragmentation. The unpredictability of leaders like Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, or Vladimir Putin underscores how individual psychology, populism, and emotion-driven narratives increasingly shape international outcomes. IR theory must adapt by integrating behavioral political science and decision-making models that reflect cognitive biases, institutional path dependencies, and societal divides. 3. Major challenges for future international politics. A. Geopolitical rivalries and great power competition. The most immediate challenge is the intensifying U.S. China rivalry, which is redefining the global balance of power. Disputes over Taiwan, the South China Sea, trade and technological supremacy are becoming zero-sum arenas. While full-scale war remains unlikely, gray zone, conflicts, cyber attacks, economic coercion, and proxy wars are becoming the norm. Russia's assertiveness in Europe and beyond, including military interventionism and influence operations, further complicates the geopolitical map. These rivalries have revived Cold War logics, making global consensus on transnational issues increasingly difficult. B. Erosion of democratic norms and rise of authoritarianism. The global democratic recession poses another major challenge. According to Freedom House and other observers, authoritarianism is on the rise, with states like Hungary, Turkey, and India facing increasing democratic backsliding. This ideological polarization weakens international cooperation, fragments global norms, and emboldens leaders to challenge liberal democratic institutions. It also contributes to normative conflict in areas like human rights, sovereignty, and international law. C. Global inequality and developmental asymmetry. Despite globalization's promises, global inequality has deepened, particularly between the global north and south. The COVID-19 pandemic and unequal vaccine distribution revealed glaring gaps in health, infrastructure, and economic resilience. Climate change, food insecurity, and energy shortages disproportionately affect developing nations. Future international politics must address developmental justice and institutional representation, especially in forums like the UN Security Council, IMF, and World Bank. If the legitimacy of the international system is to be preserved. D. Fragile states, migration, and transnational crises. Fragile and failed states remain flashpoints for conflict, extremism, and humanitarian disasters. Countries like Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and Sudan continue to suffer from protracted crises, exacerbated by climate shocks and external interventions. These dynamics fuel large-scale migration, often met with securitized and xenophobic responses in destination countries. Migration governance, refugee rights, and humanitarian responsibility will remain contentious and defining issues of the 21st century. E. Global governance and trust deficits. There is a growing crisis of trust in global governance. Citizens question international institutions, global elites, and the effectiveness of transnational cooperation. The proliferation of misinformation, state-sponsored disinformation campaigns, and declining media trust complicate informed international dialogue. Rebuilding this trust requires more transparent, democratic, and participatory forms of governance, especially in climate diplomacy, trade negotiations, and peace-building processes. Inclusive governance involving civil society, indigenous voices, youth, and marginalized groups is increasingly necessary. Conclusion: navigating a complex and fragmented future. The future of international politics will be defined by flux, contestation, and transformation. Multipolarity, digital rivalry, environmental crises, and ideological fragmentation all suggest that the old rules no longer suffice. At the same time, gaps between theory and reality, whether in models of cooperation or understandings of power, demand new intellectual tools and frameworks. To meet these challenges, international politics must embrace pluralistic perspectives, especially from the global south, develop flexible institutions that can adapt to rapid change, address inequality and representation in global decision-making, integrate climate and technology governance as core pillars of diplomacy, reconstruct global norms around justice, solidarity, and mutual responsibility. While the road ahead is uncertain and fraught with risk, it is also a moment of opportunity and inflection point for designing a more equitable, sustainable, and cooperative world order.